I used to believe that if you had asked anyone who knew me whether I was happy, they would have answered without hesitation. They would have pointed to my husband, David, who never forgot to kiss me goodbye before work, no matter how rushed his mornings were. They would have smiled when they mentioned our 2 children, Emma and Noah, whose laughter seemed to fill every corner of our home. They would have talked about our neighborhood, the weekend barbecues, the family vacations, and the photographs lining the hallway that captured birthdays, anniversaries, and Christmas mornings. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people quietly wished they had. For years, I believed it too. David wasn't perfect. Neither was I. We argued over bills, over whose turn it was to pick up groceries, over whether the kids should spend less time on their phones. Sometimes he worked late. Sometimes I lost my patience. But those disagreements always ended the same way, with an apology, a compromise, or simply sitting together after the kids had gone to bed, watching television without saying much because silence between us never felt uncomfortable. Somewhere along the way, though, I stopped seeing those quiet moments as love. I started comparing my ordinary life to the exciting lives I saw everywhere else. Every time I opened social media, someone was celebrating an anniversary on a beach in Italy, receiving flowers the size of a dining table, or posting heartfelt love letters that attracted thousands of likes. I convinced myself that real love was supposed to look dramatic. It was supposed to make your heart race every day. It was supposed to feel like the beginning of a romance forever. My life didn't feel like that anymore. It felt predictable. Every morning followed the same routine. Wake the kids. Make breakfast. Pack lunches. Drive to school. Go to work. Come home. Cook dinner. Help with homework. Wash dishes. Fall asleep exhausted. Then do it all over again. There was nothing wrong with my life. That was the tragedy. Because instead of appreciating its stability, I mistook peace for boredom. Instead of seeing loyalty, I only noticed routine. Instead of recognizing unconditional love, I focused on what I thought was missing. David noticed something had changed before I admitted it to myself. "Is everything okay?" he asked one evening while we folded laundry together. I smiled without looking at him. "I'm just tired." It wasn't entirely a lie. I was tired. Tired of feeling invisible. Tired of feeling like someone's wife instead of a woman. Tired of believing the best years of my life were already behind me. He nodded, accepted my answer, and gently squeezed my shoulder before carrying a basket upstairs. Looking back now, I wish I had told him the truth. Not because he had done anything wrong. Because he deserved the chance to fight for a marriage he didn't even know was slipping away. But I didn't tell him. Instead, I kept everything inside. Weeks turned into months. The distance between us wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It arrived quietly, disguised as harmless little things. I stopped reaching for his hand. I stopped laughing at his jokes. When he talked about his day, I listened less carefully than I used to. When he planned family weekends, I found excuses to stay distracted. He thought I was overwhelmed. I let him believe that. The children noticed it too. Emma asked one night, "Mom, are you and Dad mad at each other?" I forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Adults just get stressed sometimes." She accepted my answer because children trust their parents. I wish she hadn't. Because maybe if someone had looked me in the eyes and told me I was walking toward disaster, I would have stopped. Instead, life carried on. Then one Monday morning, everything began to change. Our company hired a new regional consultant named Ryan. He wasn't the most handsome man I'd ever met. He wasn't even the funniest. But he had something I hadn't felt directed toward me in years. Attention. The first conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. He complimented my presentation during a staff meeting. "You explain things differently," he said with an easy smile. "People actually listen when you speak." It was such a simple comment. David had complimented me hundreds of times over the years. He thanked me for everything I did for our family. He told me I was beautiful even when I wore old sweatpants and had flour on my face after baking with the kids. But somehow, hearing those words from a stranger felt different. Exciting. New. I didn't realize how dangerous that feeling could be. Over the next few weeks, Ryan always seemed to appear at the right moment. He remembered little details about conversations everyone else forgot. He asked about my interests instead of just discussing work. He made me laugh during coffee breaks. Whenever I walked into a meeting, he'd save the seat beside him. It felt harmless. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. One afternoon, he looked at me for a moment longer than usual before saying softly, "You know, I don't think you realize how remarkable you are." My heart reacted before my mind did. No one had called me remarkable in years. I smiled all the way home. David greeted me at the front door with one of his usual hugs. "You're home early," he said. "I missed you." Those words should have been enough. Years ago, they would have been. Instead, my thoughts drifted somewhere else. That terrified me. Not enough to stop. Just enough to ignore the warning. Over the following days, I found myself looking forward to work more than I looked forward to coming home. I chose nicer clothes in the mornings. I spent longer doing my hair. I checked my phone more often than I ever had before. Nothing inappropriate had happened. Not yet. But something inside me had already begun to shift. It wasn't love. It wasn't even an affair. It was the beginning of a dangerous illusion, the belief that someone new understood me better than the man who had spent nearly 15 years building a life beside me. Standing in my kitchen one quiet evening, watching David help Noah with his science project while Emma curled beside him on the couch reading a book, I remember thinking something that still haunts me to this day. Maybe this isn't the life I'm supposed to have anymore. I had no idea that the family sitting in front of me wasn't holding me back. They were the greatest blessing I would ever lose. After that evening, something inside me quietly crossed a line that I couldn't even see. I still came home every night. I still cooked dinner, helped Noah with his math homework, reminded Emma to brush her teeth, and kissed both of them goodnight. On the surface, I was still the same wife and mother I had always been. But emotionally, I was beginning to live somewhere else. Ryan became the first person I wanted to tell whenever something happened. If I had a stressful meeting, I texted him. If something funny happened at work, I shared it with him before I told David. When I received good news, I waited to see Ryan's reaction instead of my husband's. It happened so gradually that I convinced myself nothing was wrong. "We're just friends," I repeated in my head every time guilt tried to speak. Friends send messages. Friends have coffee. Friends laugh together. Friends make each other feel appreciated. Those excuses became the walls that protected me from admitting the truth. One afternoon, Ryan suggested grabbing coffee after work. "It's just 30 minutes, he said casually. "I know this little place that makes the best cappuccino in town." I hesitated. I looked at my phone. David had already texted me. *, can you pick up milk on the way home? Noah wants pancakes tomorrow, *. Such an ordinary message. So ordinary that it almost annoyed me. I stared at it before typing a quick reply. *running late. Work stuff, *. It was my first lie. A small one. A harmless one, I told myself. By the time I walked into the coffee shop, I had already chosen deception over honesty. Ryan smiled as soon as he saw me. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. For the next hour, we barely talked about work. Instead, we talked about dreams we had given up, places we wanted to visit, books we loved, and mistakes we'd made in our 20s. He listened in a way that made me feel fascinating. Every sentence I spoke seemed important to him. When I laughed, he laughed. When I shared something personal, he leaned in closer. I left that cafe feeling lighter than I had in years. At home, David was setting the dinner table with the kids. "You missed family taco night," Emma said with a pout. "I had to work." Another lie. David smiled anyway. "We saved you some." He warmed my dinner while asking if I wanted sour cream. I answered absent-mindedly because part of me was still sitting across from Ryan. That frightened me. Not enough to stop. The coffees became weekly. Then twice a week. Soon they turned into long walks after work. Ryan knew exactly what to say whenever I expressed frustration about my marriage. "You deserve to feel appreciated. You've sacrificed so much. I don't think anyone really sees how incredible you are." He never directly criticized David. He didn't have to. He simply made me compare the attention he gave me with the familiarity that naturally existed in a long marriage. Every comparison made Ryan seem brighter. Every comparison made David seem duller. Looking back now, I understand what was happening. Ryan was seeing the best version of me. He never watched me clean vomit at 2 a.m. when the kids were sick. He never saw me exhausted after grocery shopping. He never experienced the difficult conversations about finances or parenting. He only saw the polished version of me that showed up at work wearing makeup and smiling through the day. David had loved every version. Ryan only loved the easy one. But I couldn't see that then. I started creating problems in my marriage that hadn't existed before. If David forgot to call during lunch, I interpreted it as proof he didn't care. If he fell asleep on the couch after working overtime, I convinced myself he wasn't trying anymore. If he wanted a quiet weekend at home instead of going out, I labeled him boring. The truth was much simpler. He trusted our marriage. I was the one quietly abandoning it. One Saturday morning, David surprised me with breakfast in bed. Pancakes. Coffee. Fresh strawberries. He even placed a small handwritten note beside the tray. Thank you for everything you do for us. I know I don't say it enough, but we love you more than you'll ever know. Years earlier, that note would have made me cry. Instead, I smiled politely, kissed his cheek, and spent the rest of the morning wondering why Ryan hadn't replied to my message yet. That realization should have shaken me awake. Instead, I buried it. The emotional distance between David and me grew wider every week. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, he sat beside me on the porch. "I miss you," he said quietly. I looked away. "I'm right here." "No," he answered softly. "Your body is here. Your mind hasn't been for months." Those words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. He reached for my hand. "When was the last time we laughed together?" I didn't answer. "When was the last time you looked at me the way you used to?" Still, I stayed silent. "If I've done something wrong, please tell me. We can fix it." There it was. The opportunity. The conversation that could have saved everything. He wasn't angry. He wasn't accusing me. He was asking for the chance to fight for us. Instead of taking his hand, I pulled mine away. "I don't know if anything can be fixed anymore." The pain on his face lasted only a second. Then he nodded slowly. "I'll keep trying." He did. He planned date nights. He bought flowers. He arranged for his parents to watch the children so we could spend time alone. He even suggested marriage counseling. Every effort he made felt like pressure instead of love. Every gesture reminded me of what I had already decided in my heart. Meanwhile, Ryan painted a picture of a different future. "We deserve happiness," he said one evening as we walked through a quiet park. "I've never connected with anyone like this." "Neither have I," I whispered. He stopped walking. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned forward and kissed me. I wish I could say I pushed him away. I wish I could say I remembered my wedding vows. I wish I could say I thought about Emma and Noah waiting at home. I didn't. I kissed him back. That single moment shattered something that had taken 15 years to build. After that, there was no pretending it was only friendship. The affair consumed me. Secret hotel rooms replaced coffee shops. Hidden messages replaced honest conversations. I deleted call logs. Created excuses. Invented business meetings. Lied without hesitation. Each lie became easier than the last. The woman I had promised I would never become slowly disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Friends noticed. My sister asked me one afternoon, "Is everything okay between you and David?" "We're fine." "I don't think you are. We've just grown apart." She looked at me carefully before saying, "Sometimes people don't grow apart. Sometimes one person just stops watering the garden." Her words lingered in my mind for days. Even then, I refused to listen. Eventually, the secret became too heavy to carry. I told David I wanted a divorce. He stared at me as though he hadn't understood the words. "What? I'm not happy anymore." He searched my face, hoping to find uncertainty. Instead, he found someone who had already left emotionally long before she packed a suitcase. "Is there someone else?" I couldn't answer. My silence answered for me. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath that sounded more like a man trying not to break than someone simply breathing. The next morning, I walked out of the home we had spent 15 years building together. Emma cried so hard she could barely speak. Noah kept asking when I was coming back. David didn't stop me. He simply stood at the front door with tears in his eyes, holding our children close as they watched me drive away. As I turned the corner and the house disappeared from my rearview mirror, I convinced myself I wasn't losing my family. I believed I was finally driving toward the life I had always deserved. I had no idea I was actually leaving behind the only people who had ever truly loved me without conditions. For the first few weeks after I left my family, I convinced myself that every painful moment had been worth it. Ryan and I rented a small apartment on the other side of the city, and I decorated it with the same excitement I once had when David and I bought our first home together. I told myself this wasn't the end of my life, it was a new beginning. A second chance. The life I had been brave enough to choose. Ryan made it easy to believe that. He brought flowers home for no reason. He held my hand when we walked through the grocery store. He whispered that we no longer had to hide, that now we could finally be ourselves. Every romantic gesture felt like proof that I had made the right decision. Whenever guilt crept into my mind, I pushed it away. When Emma called, crying because she missed me, I told myself children eventually adapt. When Noah asked if I was coming home for movie night, I promised, soon. I never realized that soon would become a word my children eventually stopped believing. Ryan would wrap his arms around me whenever I seemed distracted. "You can't keep living in the past," he would say. "We have a future now." I wanted to believe him. So I did. The divorce became official 3 months later. David didn't fight me in court. He didn't try to punish me. He simply asked for stability for the children. When the judge finalized everything, I looked over at him. He looked older. Not because of time. Because of heartbreak. For just a second, I almost walked over and apologized. But Ryan squeezed my hand and smiled. "Let's go home." Home. The word sounded comforting then. Now, when I think about it, I realize I had already left my real home behind. At first, living together felt exciting because nothing about it was ordinary. We stayed out late, took spontaneous weekend trips, ordered takeout instead of cooking, and laughed about how everyone had said our relationship wouldn't last. "We proved them wrong," Ryan said one evening while raising a glass of wine. I smiled. "I guess we did." But little cracks began to appear sooner than I expected. It started with small things. Ryan stopped texting me during the day. The long messages that once filled my phone became one-word replies. Instead of asking how my day had been, he'd grunt while scrolling through his phone. When I tried to start conversations, he barely looked up. "Long day," he'd say. "I just want to relax." I understood. Everyone gets tired. Didn't I spend years defending David for the exact same thing? The irony escaped me then. A few weeks later, Ryan canceled our weekend getaway because he wanted to spend time with friends. "No big deal," he said. "We'll go another time." Another time never came. Then the flowers stopped. The compliments disappeared. The affectionate touches became rare. The man who once couldn't wait to see me now acted as though my presence barely mattered. One evening, I cooked his favorite dinner. I spent hours preparing it. When he walked through the door, he barely noticed. "You cooked?" "I wanted to surprise you." He shrugged. "I'm actually not that hungry." Then he grabbed his keys. "Where are you going?" "Meeting a few people." "You could have told me." "It wasn't planned." He left before I could say another word. I sat alone at the table staring at 2 untouched plates. For the first time, I remembered every dinner David had thanked me for, even when the food wasn't very good. I pushed the thought away. This was just an adjustment. Every couple goes through difficult phases. That's what I kept telling myself. Then I noticed something else. Ryan guarded his phone. If it buzzed, he'd flip it over. If I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd quickly lock the screen. The behavior looked painfully familiar. Because I had done exactly the same thing to David. One night his phone rang after midnight. He glanced at the screen before immediately declining the call. "Who was that?" I asked. "No one. No one doesn't usually call after midnight. It's work." "At midnight?" He sighed dramatically. "Do we really have to do this?" "I'm just asking." "You sound jealous." "I sound concerned." He rolled his eyes. "You knew I valued my independence before we got together." Something about that sentence unsettled me. Independence? When we were having an affair, he wanted to know everything about my day. Now suddenly I was asking too many questions. Over the following weeks, little inconsistencies began piling up. He claimed he was working late, but coworkers mentioned he had left hours earlier. He disappeared on weekends without clear explanations. He smiled at text messages he refused to show me. One afternoon, I stopped by his office with lunch, hoping to surprise him. The receptionist looked confused. He left around noon. He told me he had meetings all afternoon. She hesitated before quietly saying, "I thought he was meeting, never mind." My stomach tightened. Meeting who? She realized she'd said too much and quickly looked away. I walked back to my car with a growing sense of dread. That evening, Ryan came home acting as though nothing had happened. "How was work?" "Busy." "Really?" "Yeah." I watched him carefully. "I stopped by your office." For the first time since we'd met, genuine panic flashed across his face. "Oh. They said you left early." "I had meetings outside." "With who?" "Clients." "Which clients?" He laughed. "Why are you interrogating me?" "Because you're lying." He stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "I don't owe you a detailed schedule." The room fell silent. That sentence echoed in my mind. "I don't owe you." Not "I'm sorry." Not "let me explain." Just cold indifference. I couldn't sleep that night. The next afternoon, while Ryan was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wasn't planning to look. I truly wasn't. But the message preview appeared before the screen locked. Asterisk last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again, Redheart. Asterisk. My heart stopped. My hands started shaking. I unlocked the phone using the same passcode he'd proudly shared with me months earlier. He had never bothered changing it. There were dozens of messages. Different women. Different conversations. Some recent. Some stretching back almost a year. One conversation made my blood run cold. It had started before I had even left David. While he was telling me I was his future, he had been telling another woman exactly the same thing. Every promise he made to me had been copied and pasted into someone else's life. The apartment suddenly felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in around me. When Ryan walked into the kitchen and saw his phone in my hands, he didn't even look surprised. Instead, he sighed with irritation. "You went through my phone?" I stared at him. "Who are these women?" "They're friends. Friends don't send messages like this." He shrugged. "So what now? So what now?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "I destroyed my marriage for you. I never asked you to." The words hit harder than any slap ever could. "You told me you loved me. I loved how things were." What does that mean? It was exciting. I felt sick. "You said we were building a future together." He leaned against the kitchen counter as casually as if we were discussing the weather. "You assumed that. I gave up everything. That was your choice." Tears blurred my vision. "My children." He interrupted without a trace of guilt. "I didn't tell you to leave them." Every excuse I had made over the past year shattered in an instant. The soulmate I believed destiny had sent me wasn't standing in front of me. He never had been. He hadn't fallen in love with me. He had fallen in love with the thrill of taking someone else's wife, the secrecy, the chase, and the attention. Once the chase was over, so was his interest. As I stood there surrounded by boxes we had unpacked together, furniture we had picked out together, and dreams I had built around his promises, one horrifying truth became impossible to ignore. I hadn't traded an unhappy marriage for true love. I had traded a husband who loved me every ordinary day for a man who only loved the excitement of winning me. And in that moment, as the illusion finally collapsed, I realized I had sacrificed the only people who had ever loved me unconditionally, for someone who had never truly loved me at all. The morning after I walked out of Ryan's apartment for the last time, I sat alone in my car with no destination in mind. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I couldn't bring myself to start the engine. The silence was unbearable. Just a few months earlier, I had believed I was beginning a beautiful new chapter. Now I had nowhere that truly felt like home. For the first time since leaving my family, there was no one left to blame but myself. I wanted to hate Ryan. I wanted to convince myself that he had manipulated me, lied to me, and stolen my future. He had lied. He had used me. But the painful truth was that every major decision had still been mine. I was the one who ignored every warning. I was the one who walked away from my marriage. I was the one who watched my children cry as I packed my suitcase. No matter how many times I replayed the past, I couldn't escape that reality. For nearly 2 weeks, I barely left my apartment. Friends stopped calling because I never answered. The few co-workers who reached out eventually gave up after hearing excuse after excuse. Every mirror reflected someone I no longer recognized. My confidence had disappeared, replaced by shame that followed me everywhere. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through old photographs on my phone. There was Emma's first bicycle. Noah covered in birthday cake on his 5th birthday. David smiling while helping the kids build a snowman. A camping trip where we spent the entire weekend laughing because our tent collapsed during a storm. Every picture reminded me of something I had forgotten. I hadn't been trapped. I had been loved. Tears blurred my vision as I realized I had spent months searching for excitement while completely overlooking the quiet happiness I already possessed. I reached David's contact without thinking. My thumb hovered over the call button for nearly 5 minutes. Eventually, I pressed it. He answered after the 3rd ring. "Hello?" Hearing his voice nearly broke me. "David." A long silence followed. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. His concern surprised me. After everything I had done, his first question wasn't angry. It was compassionate. I'm sorry. Another long silence. I know. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. He took a slow breath. I forgave you a long time ago. My heart lifted for the first time in months. Then he quietly added, forgiving someone and trusting them again aren't always the same thing. His words settled heavily between us. I'd like to see the kids. They've missed you. Can I come this weekend? You can. There was no excitement in his voice. No hope. Only kindness. I thanked him before ending the call. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. I imagined Emma running into my arms. I pictured Noah smiling the way he used to. I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, things could slowly return to the way they had been. Saturday afternoon arrived. As I drove toward the house that had once been mine, every familiar street brought another memory rushing back. The bakery where we bought birthday cakes. The park where David taught Emma to ride a bike. The grocery store where Noah insisted on pushing the tiny shopping cart. Everything looked exactly the same. Except me. I parked across the street because I couldn't gather the courage to pull into the driveway. The front yard looked different. The flowers I used to plant had grown taller. The porch had been repainted. Life had continued without me. David opened the door before I even reached it. For a brief second, we simply looked at each other. He seemed older. Not dramatically. Just quieter. The kind of quiet that only comes after surviving deep pain. Come in, he said gently. The house smelled exactly as I remembered. Fresh coffee. Laundry detergent. Vanilla candles. For one overwhelming moment, it felt as though I had stepped back into my old life. Then Emma walked into the hallway. She stopped several feet away. She didn't run toward me. She didn't smile. She simply stared. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. "Hi, Mom." The distance in her voice hurt more than anger ever could. Noah appeared behind her. He had grown taller. His face looked older too. He gave me a small hug before stepping back almost immediately. "I missed you," I said. He nodded politely. "We missed you too." Polite. Not emotional. Not excited. Just polite. We sat together in the living room making awkward conversation. I asked about school. Emma answered with one-word responses. I asked Noah about baseball. He told me his team had won a tournament. When was the championship? I asked. 3 months ago. I wish I could have been there. He looked down. I know. No accusation. No anger. Just acceptance. That somehow hurt even more. Later, while David prepared lunch in the kitchen, I quietly wandered through the hallway. The family photographs had changed. New pictures had replaced the old ones. There were photos of birthdays I hadn't attended. Christmas mornings without me. School plays I never saw. A beach vacation where David stood smiling beside the children. I wasn't in a single frame. It felt as though someone had erased me from our family's history. I stood there staring until David quietly walked beside me. The kids wanted updated pictures. I nodded. I understand. He hesitated before speaking. They're doing better now. Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they shattered me. Because I finally understood something I had refused to believe. Children don't stop loving a parent overnight. They simply learn how to survive without the parent who chose to leave. That afternoon, Emma showed me her bedroom. She had redecorated it herself. I painted this wall, she said proudly. It looks beautiful. Dad helped. She smiled while saying it. The smile was genuine. I realized she had found someone dependable to lean on. It simply wasn't me anymore. Before I left, Noah handed me one of his baseball trophies. Remember when you used to come to every game? I smiled sadly. I do. I kept looking for you. His words were soft. Not cruel. Just honest. There was nothing I could say. No apology could give him back the afternoons he had spent scanning the crowd hoping I would appear. As I prepared to leave, Emma surprised me. She hugged me tightly. For one hopeful second, I believed everything might still be repaired. Then she whispered something that has echoed in my heart every day since. I still love you, Mom. I closed my eyes. I love you too. But... She hesitated. We're just different now. Different. Such a simple word. Yet it carried the weight of every missed birthday, every unanswered phone call, every bedtime story I never read, every tear I wasn't there to wipe away. On the drive home, I cried harder than I ever had before. Not because Ryan had betrayed me. Not because my marriage had ended. But because I finally understood the true cost of my choices. The people I loved had not frozen in time waiting for my return. They had healed. They had adapted. They had learned to celebrate birthdays, build memories, solve problems, and find happiness without me. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment holding one of Emma's old drawings I had found tucked inside a box. Across the top, written in bright blue crayon, were the words she had written years earlier. My family is my favorite place. I stared at that sentence until the tears blurred the paper. Once, I had been part of that favorite place. Now I was only a visitor. And in the silence of that empty apartment, I finally accepted the hardest lesson of my life. Some people will forgive your mistakes. Some hearts will always love you. But there are losses so deep that love alone can never return things to the way they once were. Every choice leaves a mark, and some doors, once closed, never fully open again. The months that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. There was no dramatic ending, no miraculous reunion, and no moment when everything suddenly fell back into place. Life simply kept moving, whether I was ready for it or not. The world didn't stop because my heart was full of regret. Every morning the sun rose, people went to work, children went to school, and families gathered around dinner tables. Mine did too. The only difference was that I no longer had a seat at it. I slowly accepted that regret doesn't disappear because you cry enough. It doesn't fade because you apologize 100 times or replay the past until you know every mistake by heart. Regret becomes something you learn to carry. Some days it feels lighter. Other days it sits on your chest so heavily that breathing itself becomes difficult. I stopped trying to escape it. Instead, I began facing it. I found a small apartment closer to the children's school. It wasn't because I expected to become part of their daily lives again. It was because I wanted to be available if they ever needed me. Every Wednesday evening, David allowed me to have dinner with Emma and Noah. At first, those dinners were awkward. We talked about school assignments, baseball practice, homework, and television shows. There were long silences between conversations, and every silence reminded me of the years I had thrown away. But I kept showing up. Not because it erased the past. Because consistency was the only apology my children could actually believe. Months passed before Emma began texting me first. One afternoon my phone buzzed. Asterisk Mom, can you help me study for my history test? Asterisk. It was only one sentence. Most parents would barely notice it. I cried for nearly 10 minutes. Not because it was extraordinary. Because it meant she trusted me enough to ask for help again. That trust had to be earned one small moment at a time. No speeches. No promises. Just showing up. Noah took longer. He remained polite but distant. He never argued with me. He never raised his voice. In many ways, his kindness hurt more than anger would have. Anger meant someone still expected something from you. His politeness felt like acceptance. Acceptance that I was no longer part of his everyday life. One Saturday, he invited me to watch one of his baseball games. I arrived an hour early because I was terrified of being late again. I sat quietly in the bleachers while parents filled the stands around me. I noticed David across the field talking with another family. He laughed at something one of the coaches said, and for the first time in a long while, I saw genuine peace on his face. Years earlier, seeing him happy without me would have made me jealous. Now it filled me with gratitude. He deserved happiness. I had spent too long believing my choices only affected me. The truth was that everyone I loved had carried the consequences of my decisions. When the game ended, Noah walked over carrying his glove. "You came. I told you I would." He smiled. A real smile. Not a polite one. It lasted only a second. But it was enough to remind me that broken relationships are rebuilt with actions, not words. That evening, I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not hope that I would get my old life back. That life was gone forever. Hope that I could become someone my children would be proud to know again. Around that time, I also began volunteering at a local community center that supported families going through divorce. At first, I believed I had nothing valuable to offer anyone. Then one afternoon, another woman sat beside me after a discussion group. She looked exhausted. "I think I've fallen in love with someone else," she admitted quietly. Her words instantly transported me back to the woman I used to be. The woman who believed excitement was proof of destiny. She asked, "How did you know what to do?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. I knew exactly what I wanted. She nodded. "So what happened?" "I was wrong." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I confused being noticed with being loved. She remained silent. I thought butterflies were more important than loyalty. Still, she listened. I believed that because someone made me feel alive, they would make me happy forever. Tears filled my eyes. I didn't realize that real love often looks ordinary while you're living inside it. She whispered, "Do you regret it?" I smiled sadly. Every single day. Not because my life had become difficult. Because I finally understood what I had thrown away. Love isn't measured by grand gestures. It's measured by the person who stays when life becomes ordinary. The person who holds your hand in hospital waiting rooms. The one who remembers how you take your coffee after 20 years. The one who sits beside you in complete silence without needing to impress you. The one who chooses you long after excitement fades. I had mistaken consistency for boredom. Routine for unhappiness. Peace for emptiness. And by the time I recognized the difference, I had already shattered the people who trusted me most. Nearly 3 years after the divorce, Emma graduated from high school. I sat proudly in the audience beside dozens of other parents. David sat a few seats away. When Emma received her diploma, she smiled toward both of us. After the ceremony, she hugged her father first. Then she hugged me. "I'm glad you came," she said. "So am I." No bitterness. No pretending the past hadn't happened. Just two people trying to build something honest from broken pieces. Later that evening, David walked over while everyone else celebrated. "You've changed," he said. "I had to." He nodded. "I think the kids see that." "I hope so." He looked toward Emma and Noah laughing together. "They'll always love you." "I know. But I also know they'll never have the childhood they deserved." He didn't argue. Because some truths don't need comforting. Before leaving, he placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "For what it's worth. I hope you find peace. Not love. Not another chance. Peace." As I drove home alone that night, I realized he had given me one final gift. Not reconciliation. Grace. The kind of grace that expects nothing in return. Today, people sometimes ask why I share my story so openly. They assume it's because I'm searching for sympathy or trying to punish the man who deceived me. They're wrong. Ryan is no longer the center of this story. The affair isn't either. The real story is about the quiet moments we fail to appreciate until they're gone. It's about the danger of believing that happiness always exists somewhere else. It's about how easily gratitude can disappear when we begin comparing our ordinary lives to someone else's carefully edited fantasy. Most importantly, it's about choices. One decision made in loneliness became another decision made in secrecy. That became another made in selfishness. Before I realized it, a lifetime of love had been traded for an illusion that disappeared the moment reality arrived. If someone listening to my story feels invisible in their marriage, I hope they choose an honest conversation instead of silent resentment. If someone believes the excitement of a new relationship is worth risking the people who already love them, I hope they stop long enough to ask themselves one question. Who has been choosing me every ordinary day, even when life wasn't exciting? Because I learned the answer too late. I spent years searching for a love I thought was missing, only to discover that I had been surrounded by it all along. I broke my family apart for a man who never loved me. But the greatest loss wasn't my marriage. It wasn't the empty apartment. It wasn't the betrayal. The greatest loss was realizing that my children had to learn how to live without the one person who promised they never would. If my story has any purpose, let it be this. Never mistake temporary excitement for lasting love. Never assume that loyalty will always be waiting when you're ready to come back. And never forget that the people who quietly stand beside you through ordinary days are often the greatest blessing you'll ever have. Because once they're gone, no amount of regret can turn yesterday into tomorrow again.